All right, guys, now one of the things I get asked about the most as a realtor here in the state of Maine, both from buyers and from sellers, is about the home appraisal process. What do you need to know? What do you need to do? Stick around. Today we're going to go over 6 things you need to know about the home appraisal process. All right, everybody, welcome back to the channel. It is your realtor, Nick Isgro, with eXp Realty here in the state of Maine. As you know, on this channel, we cover all things real estate here in the state of Maine, particularly in the central Maine market, but also in other areas as well. If that's of interest to you, if that adds value to you, you just want to know a little bit more about real estate here in the state, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Go ahead and hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, smash that alarm bell, and you will be notified every time I put out new content. As I said at the beginning, today we're going to go over the 6 things that you might need to know about the home appraisal process. And this is one of the topics that I get asked about the most, both from buyers and from sellers. Regardless of which side you're on the transaction, everybody seems to have some kind of unease or a little bit of nerves about the home appraisal process. And really, it's a very straightforward process. It's not super complicated, but there are some things that you should know, both as you're going through it, about what it is, what it isn't, and how to prepare and how to face any challenges that might come up. So we're going to jump right into that right now. Now, if this is the first time that you're selling a house, you might want to know that pricing your home right for the sale and getting the solid appraisal that goes with the sale price is one of the most important things going on in the transaction, because most buyers out there are going to be working with the bank. They're going to be financing. A bank is not going to finance a loan for more than the home is worth or appraised for. So you want to get the price right from the get-go, particularly if they have financing, and even more particularly if the financing is tight, like a 3 or 5% down type of loan. Either way, an acceptable appraisal is going to be one of the linchpins for the majority of buyers out there. So you want your home to appraise when the appraisal comes, and you don't want to be in a situation where your home is marked much higher than what it's going to appraise for, because it's just going to be a contingency that comes up in almost every contract that you work with. Now, you want to think strategically when you're thinking about pricing your home out. Not only is the price what your prospective buyers are going to zero in on, but the appraiser that gets sent out after the fact is going to be trying to target in on that number as well. Now, if you're working with a professional realtor, they're going to give you a comparative market analysis, which is essentially looking at local sales, preferably within a half a mile, a quarter of a mile of your home. If you are in some more rural markets, or if there's just not a lot of sales, they will go outside that scope. But essentially what we're looking for is homes that are like your home, in the same area as your home, and trying to see what they sold for, make any adjustments that we need to make, and coming up with a range of price that we feel comfortable is the fair market value of your home, the price that your home is likely to sell for in a good and robust market. Now, the appraiser is going to do something very similar. They're going to be looking at almost the same type of thing that the realtors are. They're just going to go a little bit more in depth as they're going through the process and marking off the comparables. Some of the things that you want to know as you're going through and you're comparing your home to others are: where is your home located in town compared to some of the other homes you're looking at? What is the age of your home? What is the condition of your home? And this is where you really want to be honest with yourself. Even if your home is old, it may not matter. Perhaps you've done a lot of renovations, you've put in new countertops, new bathrooms, things like that. But there's also a lot of homes out there that, frankly, are still stuck in the 1970s and 80s. Now, that's totally okay if that's the house you live in. You just want to know that when you're comparing it to other homes, because you want to see, how does this really stack up in price compared to some of those other homes? For example, is it going to take another $10,000 or $20,000 in improvements to make my home look like the home I'm comparing it to? Or is my home actually superior to those other homes? Maybe we've done those things, or maybe it just happens to be a new home. Either way, these are the kinds of things you want to consider when you're looking at the proper price of your home. All right, so we're moving on to the second phase of this, which is getting your home appraised. So a contract's been signed, the seller and the buyer have entered what is the option phase, essentially. There's going to be a whole host of conditions likely that need to be met. There's going to be an inspection period. That inspection usually takes place within the first few days, or at least the first week or two, gets that out of the way. But there's also other conditions that need to be met. Likely, if you're the buyer, you've put in some conditions into the contract that are going to be contingent upon financing. Now, your financing is going to be likely, depending on your loan type and the amount that you have down, contingent upon the appraisal of the home. So if you're the seller side of this, you need to know, as you're looking through that contract, when you're looking at the financing, it's probably going to have to appraise if there's those finance contingencies in the contract. So why is this? Well, it's because the lender is not going to give a loan for more than the home is worth, more than the home is appraised for. The reason for that is if the buyer isn't going to make the payments on the loan, if the loan gets past due, it's going to go into the foreclosure process, and that bank wants to know that if they have to repossess the house, they can put it to market and recoup the loss from the loan on the sale. So let's give an example about how this works. Let's say you're under contract on a home for $250,000, and this doesn't matter what side of this you're on. The home is under contract for $250,000. It appraises at $230,000. Well, what does that mean? It means that there's a $20,000 gap between the value of the home, the appraised value of the home, and the purchase price that the contract was written for. So there's now this $20,000 disparity that, frankly, your buyer is probably not likely to be able to come up with unless they happen to have that amount of cash on hand. Now, there are some people that do. I've seen it happen where somebody has that cash on hand and they're going to come in and say, hey, listen, don't worry about it, no problem, we really want the house. We're going to put the extra money down to do it. Not the most likely scenario. Because appraisals are often contingencies in the contracts, if it doesn't appraise and the financing can't happen and you can't agree on the price, at that point, the buyer does have the option to walk away from the contract. All right, moving on to phase 3 is now actually conducting the appraisal. So you're in this contract period, the appraiser has been contacted and selected by the bank, they've picked up the appraisal, they're on their way to come out to the house and actually conduct the appraisal. Now, a little note here, the appraisal actually belongs to the buyer. So if you're the seller, you actually don't have a right to see the appraisal. However, you are the one who is likely to see the appraiser because the appraiser has to come to your house and go do the appraisal. Now, that appraisal can be anywhere from 30 minutes to up to 3 hours. It's going to depend on how thorough the appraiser needs to be or is going to be, and how big the house is and how many issues manifest themselves during the appraisal for the appraiser to look into. So what are some of the things that the appraiser is looking at? Well, the appraiser is going to obviously look at the age, the size, the construction. They're going to check out the roof, they're going to check out the foundation, and just get a general sense, at least, of what's apparent to the eye of what is the condition of the home. Now, this is not an inspection. They're not going to be going into the attic and scraping up things and taking samples and sending them to the lab. That's the inspection. This is what's available to the eye that the appraiser can see and really try to pinpoint those things in comparison to other homes that they're comparing your home to. Other factors that may come in here are things like proximity to good schools, proximity to parks, recreation, things like that. Your location is going to matter somewhat to this appraisal as well. It's not everything. It's not going to be the core decider of the appraisal by any means, but these are all factors that go in as they're looking at your home to see what it's going to appraise for. Expect the appraiser to take a lot of photos, use floor plans, measurements, and things like that so they can really dial it in and come up with a good value, an honest value for the home. All right, so I just touched on this a little bit. We're going to go to number 4 thing here is appraisals versus inspections, because this seems to be where a lot of the confusion comes out when I'm talking to clients, both sellers and the buyers. Like I said earlier, the home inspection is going to take place very early on in the process. Typically, it's a 10 business day thing, although it's always negotiable. It's going to depend on whatever this specific contract is dealing with that you're involved in. The home inspection is going to be a much more thorough process. It's probably going to take at least a couple of hours every time if you have a good inspector, and the inspector is really looking at things that are conditional of the home. They're going to look at your electric system. They're going to look at the heating system. They're going to look at some of the appliances, even like the stove and the refrigerator. There's going to be some air quality, often water tests, radon tests, really getting into the home to figure out what is the full cost of ownership of this home. And you're usually going to get a list of anywhere from 15 to 30 items, maybe more, maybe less, not usually less because every house has some things going on in there, but just a really in-depth analysis of all of the things that you may or may not want to address when you own the home. That is what the inspection is. The appraisal is going to be much more superficial and deal really with looking at the outside of the home, the inside of the home, general conditions of the home compared to other homes that have sold on the market and coming up with a market value or an appraised value of the home. So we have something to fall back on. And so the bank knows, yes, the home is likely going to be worth X amount of dollars. All right, moving on to the fifth thing you need to know about the appraisal process is what happens if the home fails to appraise? Well, right out of the gate, if the appraisal matches the purchase price or is more than the purchase price, you're gonna move right forward with the closing process. If it doesn't and it comes up a little short, typically this is going to set off a new stage of negotiation between the seller and the buyer. Now, I should state up front that because the contract was conditional on a purchase price, the seller is under no obligation to sell it for a lower price. The seller does have the option to walk back out and say, no, we're going to remarket it and see if we can get that higher price. One thing to think about if you are the seller in that circumstance is you have to ask yourself, what are the chances that another appraiser is going to come in here and come up with some wildly different value that increases the value? Typically, the appraised value is going to be very accurate. You'll know if not, you and your realtor can get together and really crunch the numbers, look at the comparables. Sometimes I've even seen or have been involved in going back and forth with the appraiser, trying to send the appraiser, he or she, some comps that we're able to find and say, have you looked at this house? Have you considered this? But at the end of the day, typically you're going to enter a new negotiation period between the seller and the buyer. So if you're the seller, you want to start negotiating with the buyer on how to foot the difference between the appraised value and the sale value. As I said earlier, there's going to be those buyers out there that are able to come up with a little bit of cash. Sometimes they can come up with the entire difference, sometimes they can't, and that's where the negotiation comes in. So it could be, well, there's a $20,000 difference, we've got an extra $5,000, are you willing to lower the sale price by $15,000. That would be an example of how that could work. You want to keep yourselves in the process, moving this process forward. And my big piece of advice to both parties, to buyers and sellers, is just go in and negotiate with a spirit of good faith. If you do that and both parties do that, you're probably going to find a happy point where all parties feel that they are making out okay and it's a fair deal, and you're going to move forward to closing. So you could go back and try to negotiate and ask for a second opinion. You could go back and come up with a cash offer for the full difference. You can negotiate together, the buyer and the seller, to come up with that difference. Or at the end of the day, you could ask for a second appraisal. Now, that risk of the second appraisal is going to be more on the buy side. So buyers out there understand that, because typically buyers are the ones who are paying for the appraisals, unless you can negotiate with the seller on that and say, look, if you want a second appraisal, we'll do it, but maybe you can split the cost, or maybe you could pay for this one. But that is an option as well. So you do have multiple options to negotiate and to work through the event the home doesn't appraise. This is why it's very important on the front end to try to price the house right, but sometimes no matter how hard you try, you just end up getting a low appraisal. But 99% of the time, you're probably going to just work through it, seller and buyer, and get to the end of the road here. All right, this last piece of information is really to you sellers out there, and this is, how do you prepare your home for the appraisal? Well, first things first, please tidy up the house. Just like when you're doing showings, you want the house to look as best as it can when the appraiser is coming through. So you don't only want it to look good when the buyers are coming through, you get it under contract and it's like, well, great, put your feet up in the air and you can relax. No, you don't want to do that. You want to keep the house looking good through the appraisal, so that when the appraiser comes in, they get that immediate great first impression about the home that they're entering. Second, conduct any repairs and paint jobs. I'm not saying go and paint the entire house, but if you have a room that looks particularly bad because it needs a repair, maybe it's got a hole in the wall, maybe there's a light fixture hanging without a cover, get those things fixed, get them covered up, get the patches painted over where you need to, freshen things up that need to be freshened up, and you're going to have a better process with the appraiser. Don't want to get too sensitive on you here, but when the appraiser is there, please keep your pets and kids away from the home, because the last thing you want is for the appraiser to be going through the house and feel like they're constantly trying to navigate around clutter and chaos and things like that. It's just going to give them a bad taste in their mouth as they're looking at the house. So have it be a nice, open, quiet place for them to get through. The last thing you could do is collect any homeowner's documents. If you have anything that's going to add to the documentation of your home, like perhaps perhaps receipts for new roofs, things like that. Any information you can provide that's going to cast your home in a better light to the appraiser. If you have it filed away, pull it out, have it on the counter, and offer that to the appraiser when he gets there. He may or may not use it, may or may not need it. Some of these things might be clear to the open eye, but some of these things might not, and it might just work to your benefit to have them available in the case that they want them. All right, guys, that's it for today. This is the home appraisal process from start to finish, things that you should consider and know about when you're thinking about the home appraisal process, whether you are a buyer or a seller. As always, if you are a buyer or a seller in the market and you've been having experiences, whether it's fears, anxieties, or you had an experience you want to talk about from a good or bad appraisal experience, please go ahead and drop a comment in the box below. I would love to engage on that topic and chat with you on that. If you have any questions, as always, guys, my name is Nick Isgro with eXp Realty here in Central Maine. Feel free to reach out with any questions at all. I'm happy to get back to you. And even if you're not in my market, if you need the professional advice of a realtor, I'd be happy to reach out to colleagues I work with all over the country and get you referred to a professional that can suit your needs no matter where you are. Thanks so much for sticking around to the end of this video, and I will see you next time.